Here it is, the video you've all been waiting for. DPA revisions for kindergarten, first, and second grade for the 2018-19 school year. Before we start talking about the revisions, just a reminder about assessment due dates. The first trimester DPA will be due November 2nd, 2018. This was on the assessment calendar in your handbooks with the reminder that it is under construction for this school year, and it will be delivered to your sites by October 1st, 2018. Just taking a step back on the purpose of the DPA, it is a benchmark assessment that measures progress on grade level content standards in ELA and math. The DPA provides the district and sites the ability to have a snapshot of student proficiency and student growth on their content standards. We also want it to provide teachers information that can positively impact instructional decisions such as pacing or interventions that are needed. Now, with that being said, in May of 2018, groups of teachers came together for our guaranteed and viable curriculum. In those conversations, they established tiers of standards: enduring, need to know, and worth being familiar with. And because of that, different suggestions for revisions were made at that committee in May of 2018. Over the summer, those revisions were put into place, and in August of 2018, teachers volunteered to come after school and look at the revisions that had been made based on the GVC suggestions, and then provide further revisions. So both at the workshop and then afterwards, they worked with either just themselves or within their PLC to provide more revision recommendations, leading us now to our quote-unquote final DPA for the 2018-2019 school year. Now, final is in quotes simply because it will stay for this year, but this is a living, breathing document that we want to continue to come back to make sure it still meets those goals of providing a snapshot of our student proficiency and student growth on grade level standards, as well as making sure that teachers can use it for instructional decisions. And again, the copies of the DPA tasks for this first administration for DPA 1 will be at your sites in October of 2018. Some clarifications before we get to the revisions. We know that these things are true, but we just want to make sure everyone hears it and we have the same message. We do not teach only what is on the DPA. We teach all of our standards, but we want more time and emphasis. And because of that, at a district level, we only really are assessing enduring and need to know standards. The DPA is one measure, and it is an important measure, but it is not the only measure. So it would be unfair for a report card grade to only be consisting of one DPA task or a score from one DPA task. I know we all know that, but just making sure that everyone has that information. Some DPA tasks have been omitted. That doesn't mean that it was a bad task. Simply trying to balance the time of instruction and the time of assessment, decisions were made based on the GVC for the enduring, the need to know, and the worth being familiar with, and I'll get into some more specifics for each grade level. But if a DPA task has been omitted, the PLCs still have the option to use that task as a common formative assessment. They can adapt it however they please, and that can be one of the items that a grade might be pulled for the report card. But the removal of a task doesn't mean that either the task was bad or that the standard is not important. It's, again, just trying to balance the time of instruction and the time of assessment. So coming back here, I'm going to show for each grade level where the GVC is, just as a reminder. All right, so let's take a look at the first grade math DPA. A quick refresher, here were from the GVC recommendations in May, the enduring standards, the need to know standards, and the worth being familiar with standards for first grade math. Now, again, based on those, recommendations were made and revisions were brought to a group in August. This is on the left-hand side, the 2017-2018 DPA, and on the right-hand side is the newly revised 2018-2019. Right off the bat, you can see that the old DPA had 11 tasks, and this new DPA for this year only has 7 tasks. The reason for that was some tasks were omitted or combined based on recommendations from the GVC. So really quickly, let's just look at a task overall glance. You can see that on this previous year DPA, there were 4 tasks that all had to do with numbers in base 10.1, the counting to 120 and reading and writing. Right off the bat, this task 2, was omitted. It was the number ID task. And just based on balancing time of instruction and time of assessment, it was omitted because that standard was already addressed in other tasks. In addition, tasks 3 and 4 have been combined into a single task. Now, moving along, task 5, it is now task 3, and there have been some changes in format that we'll talk about. Task 6 is now task 4, and items from task 6 and the old task 7 were combined to move this 10 more, 10 less, as well as the comparing into a single task. So you can see on this side that the new task 4 is both the comparing and mentally finding 10 more, 10 less. That meant that task 7, the adding, is on its own task now, and there have been some new problems to be added to make it a more robust task, but we'll cover those in a little bit. If you keep going down, the addition, subtraction to solve word problems is still there. It is just now task 6 on this side. It was task 8. The unknown add-in problem, this entire task has been omitted. Task 9, it was omitted because they were addressing standards that were worth being familiar with. So in the interest of balancing time of assessment and instruction, they've been removed, as well as the telling and writing time in half hours using clocks. That was also a worth being familiar with standard. Now, the geometry standard, it stayed, and there were some changes to layout and making sure that you could see the halves, fourths, and quarters. All right, so let's take a look a little bit more in depth at some of the changes in formatting and structure of some of the tasks that did remain on the first grade DPA. This is just meant to help you keep track of what task is due when, and it corresponds to what DPA Scantron number. This first task, the writing numbers, has not changed in scoring or anything else. You still have the option to use either task worksheet number 1 or worksheet number 2, the horizontal or the vertical. This task is the one that has been combined based on the previous tasks 3 and 4. So you have some shading, some counting, where they have a multiple choice, and then this is a new question, but same thing, counting using the 10 frames and then writing the number in the box. This is the same from the previous, but instead of a multiple choice, they're having to write. And then these tasks came from the old task 4, where they were writing the missing numbers in a box, and they get a point for each one. So it's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 points total. All right, for task 3, which was previously task 5, the scoring has changed a little bit because for problems 1 and 2, they are now worth 3 points each. They get 1 point for the correct number of 10s, 1 point for the correct number of 1s, and 1 point for the total. You'll notice that the expanded form has been taken off. That is not a first grade standard, so that is gone. But they get 1 point for saying that there are 2 10s, 1 point for saying that there are 3 1s, and then a third point for saying that the total is 23. Same thing here. You get 1 point for saying there's 1 10s and 4 1s. 4 1s and 14. So both of these are worth 3 points. They then have to write how many 10s and then draw 56 in the box somehow. So I'm going to quickly do 5 10s and pretend that's 6 1s, and there you go. And then the last one is just what number does the model show? So counting up the 10s and the 1s and writing in the box. 3 points available for number 1, 3 points available for number 2, 3 points available for number 3 because a point here, and then 1 for the drawing, and then just 1 point for a total of 10 points. All right. This task 4, was combined from the old task 6 and 7. So it assesses now NBT 3 and 5, the comparing numbers, and mentally finding 10 more, 10 less. So this has just been shrunk a little bit, but the questions are pretty much the same. We separated out the true and the false because teachers made the comment that once the student gets into the habit of finding the true, then it became very hard to switch gears to the false. So we divided it up and put a true and then a 10 more, a 10 less, and then a false. And then they just have to solve these 2 problems. Each of those is just worth 1 point for a total of 10 points. All right, task 5 was the old task 7. Please pay attention to this scoring guide. There is a new rubric that we'll talk through, but this rubric is for question number 4. You'll recognize the question and hopefully the rubric will help out. So What we did here was we added some questions. This was an enduring standard, but it was a very small portion of the previous task. So we added some questions so it was more rigorous to meet the standard. The overall instructions are use numbers, pictures, or words to solve each problem. And you'll notice that for questions 1 through 3, it's worth 2 points. 1 point for anywhere having the correct answer and 1 point for any sort of evidence, whether it's numbers, pictures, or words. So it's worth 2 points each. That's supposed to be a 2. So 2 points for number 1, number 2, and number 3. The reasoning behind it was we had one that used base 10 blocks without regrouping, one that used a visual of base 10 blocks with regrouping, and then one that used regrouping but no visual of the base 10 blocks. So we tried to ramp up the rigor on this task. All right, so for question number 4, you'll recognize it's the same thing, Kate and her shells. So she has 16 shells, she gets 20 more. How many shells does Katie have now? I just noticed that, Kate and Katie. I wonder who made this. So I apologize, I'll fix that later. But probably for DPA number 2. Anyhow, this question, number 4, is now worth 4 points. They get 1 point for having the correct answer, another point for any evidence, whether that's a number, picture, or words. And then for the words to explain, we did keep that in there, so we wanted them to take it to writing. But for the writing, it is worth anywhere from 0 to 2 points, and that's where the rubric will come in. So for a perfect score, they need to have the correct answer, any evidence, and then up to 2 points, and that's how the 4 points comes in. Let me scroll back up to the rubric. For the written explanation that is worth up to 2 points, the rubric below is what you would use, and spelling and grammar are not taken into account. But in the written part only, if they didn't have any response or unclear writing that didn't show any steps to solve, they would get 0 points. A partial understanding of the math, or there might be errors, is worth 1 point. And 2 points is a complete understanding of the math, and there's no errors in the math. They could have errors, again, in the spelling and grammar, but those don't count. So with all of that said, we have 2 points, 2 points, 2 points, and then a total of 4 for a whole total of 10 points for that task. Task number 6, this has stayed the same. The scoring has also stayed the same. Each question is worth 2 points. Any correct answer and any evidence. The students can choose how to illustrate their thinking, whether they use tally marks, circles, anything, draw cats and ants. So they solve the story problem and then write the correct number in the box. This has not changed. So 5 questions worth 2 points each. Then that's where the addition, subtraction as an unknown number and the telling and writing time, those have been removed. So then your final task is the geometry task. We just updated and kind of bolded and underlined some of the different things to make it a more obvious of what the task was. We wanted to minimize threats and distractions, as well as making sure that these all came out bold so that you could see the fourths and so on. But that is all for first grade math. Please pay close attention to some of those scoring changes that we talked about to make sure that you and your PLC are scoring correctly and fairly. Thank you so much. Okay, first grade ELA DPA. As a reminder, here are our enduring standards, our green standards, as well as the blue need to know standards, and our yellow worth being familiar with standards. I show that as a reminder because some of the changes to the DPA were made based on these recommendations from GBC. One thing to note that I will talk about later, for language, there are 2 standards that link to all the substandards, but grammar and usage when writing and speaking, and then specifically calling out capitalization, punctuation, and spelling. I bring that up because the language tasks on the DPA is still a work in progress. So just keep that in mind, and then we'll talk about it in a little bit. So here we have on the left-hand side of the screen, the 2017 and 18 DPA from last year, and on the right-hand side of the screen, the 2018-19 newly revised DPA. Now, you'll notice, I just want to call it out, that it jumps from 4 to 7, because like I said, these language tasks, we know something needs to be done. We don't need to have them done by trimester 1, so they have not yet been addressed. There's a lot of conversations around it. So at our first grade writing day, we're going to have a tiny chunk of time to just discuss this and air out some different frustrations. We know that, if, for example, tasks 8 and 9 are all based on a 50-50 chance. We know that We want to assess more authentically. So whether that's done in a writing performance task, whether that's done with them just writing sentences and then going back, all that to say, we know that we need to come back to and have a conversation about the language tasks. But let's now take a look at tasks what was 1 through 6 on the previous DPA and is now just 1 through 4 and the reasons behind that. So the largest thing is that task 2, this phonemic awareness, has been removed completely. So this was based on the fact that while this standard is, if we go back here, a green enduring standard, it was too repetitive based on information that we already received from Dibbles, from Bass, from the guided reading behaviors to notice a note. So this task, in order to balance time of instruction and time of assessment, we felt that we weren't getting any information from this task that we couldn't otherwise get from an assessment we were already using. And again, Dibbles, Bass, and etc. So this task has been removed for all 3 administrations of the DPA. The other is task 6. This is the one sentence about the cup of milk. Same thing. It was repetitive with Bass and guided reading, and there wasn't anything from this task that we couldn't otherwise get with the previously used assessment. So while RF 1.3 is one of the enduring standards, we're already assessing it, so we got rid of that task as well. So you can see now that for 2018-19, there are only 4 tasks within the reading. And then again, that conversation about the language. But now let's take a closer look at some of these tasks. There have been some little changes. All right, for task 3. This task, there were some repetition on the digraphs. So we moved some of the digraphs around and added in some new words. So just keep that in mind. The 10 words now are shed, this, flat, chop, win, trim, patch, wish, crab, and bath. We wanted an assortment of the most commonly used digraphs, as well as having them at the end and the beginning of words. Here we have some of these. I don't know if any of these were changed, but you'll notice that task 6, the conversation about Jen and Pete and the cup of milk, is no longer there. Task 6 is gone. And again, that's when we start the language standards, where we have the conversation about, do we really need 7 sentences to look at the correct ending punctuation, or is it better to just have this more authentic where they're having to write the sentences? And then in tasks 8 and 9, where they really could just get a lucky yes because it's out of only 2, versus this more authentic where they're having to write a sentence. So that's what the conversation will be. And just keep that in mind, that the language tasks are being revised and we'll do it collaboratively. But that's pretty much it for the ELA DPA in 1st grade. Thank you.